So, folks, let's talk about the really depressing topic of why England are performing so miserably at the current European Championships, and how this is not really a new phenomenon when looking back into the past. We'll all be aware that there are a lot of question marks around Gareth Southgate and his capabilities as a manager, but there should also be similar sort of question marks against the playing squad, which seem to have similar weaknesses or displaying traits that are very similar to some of the England players of the past that have also underwhelmed. Now, if we look a bit further back, I think probably we're looking at the period around 96, 98, when we're really talking about a really strong team where the coaching identity on the pitch was pretty well mapped out. Everybody believed in that. There was a very distinct style and energy within the team. So that was, of course, at the period around Euro 96, when the tournament was held in England under Terry Venables. And then moving on to France 98 under Glenn Hoddle. Now, 96, of course, you can say in both cases they were really unlucky in terms of progressing in the tournament and not going, in the case of 96, all the way to the final and winning it due to certain games against Germany, and as well as in 98, obviously the infamous incident with David Beckham, who became the most famous scapegoat in that difficult period for him straight afterwards. But in both cases, the teams, like I said, were extremely, there seemed to be a real togetherness in the way that they played, and a real, let's say, flexibility in terms of playing good football, but also getting stuck in when needed, having that real leadership profiles throughout the team as well, that allowed them to rise to the occasion. Now, since then, we've had a number of different managers. So we've had names like Kevin Keegan, Steve McLaren, Fabio Capello, Sven-Göran Eriksson, who's a little bit earlier, Roy Hodgson, a couple of smaller appointments as well before we then landed with Gareth Southgate. In all of those cases, I don't think any of these managers have really, either they couldn't or they wouldn't instill, let's say, some sort of identity on the team. In some cases, that would have just been, to be honest, through pure ability. So names like McLaren, Kevin Keegan. In the end, someone like Sven-Göran Eriksson as well, probably overstated in terms of what he was actually capable of. These type of names, I think they just, maybe this level was too much for them and the type of players that they had to work with. In other cases, it was maybe more on a cultural side. So Fabio Capello, that integration never really seemed to click from the very start. And overall, it didn't seem to be a very successful experiment trying all these different types of managers. I think Sven really came in as a bit of a poster boy as well at that time. We're going to now get this big name and really look to explode what England's possible to achieve at a tournament. And if you add at that time the so-called player group, the main one throughout that period, the golden generation with the Lampards and Terrys and Beckhams and Gerrards of the world, who were really overhyped to such an extent by the media that they almost became unmanageable as a group in terms of being able to drop them and really find the right solutions for the team rather than indulging, let's say, their egos on an individual level. So that in itself became very difficult. Sven, I think, was one of these that really found it difficult to then play maybe the right players, right being in inverted commas, instead of just trying to fit every single sort of personality in the team. And that could be something similar that we're having troubles with at the moment. Layer on top, finally, then the insane amount of media hype around this generation, around the individual players, and you start setting expectations with fans that are absolutely sky high and will inevitably be leading to not even just disappointment, but crushing disappointment, even more than you would expect usually. So if we jump to today, we'll see quite a number of patterns and behaviors that are very similar to what we've seen in the past. Big feeling of deja vu, in essence. Essentially, you can talk about tactics all you want and what's really happening on the pitch. So, for example, we can see that the players are not really understanding the instructions, whether that's something on their side or the lack of communication from the coaching's perspective. You can see that the press is really out of sync. There's gaps between the lines. The left side is out of whack. There's no relationships with any of the players in different areas of the pitch. Harry Kane looks off the pace, potentially not fully fit. There are question marks already before the tournament started in terms of the original selection and leaving out players that could potentially have been effective in providing some inspiration. There is, seeming a lack of a desire to even use the options that we have at the moment, so the players that we have taken, and even where needed, make some dramatic changes in response to the performances that we've had so far and the upcoming opposition. So quite a number of tick boxes in a negative way in terms of what we're showing. But in the end, the real root cause sits both on the coaching side as well as the player group. And when neither of them are functioning, then of course that's a bit of a disaster situation, which is probably somewhere where England is sitting. If both of them are working, of course, that's how you're really becoming a contender and potentially going to championships. Even if one of them, so the coaching group is very good, a manager who has a clear vision, clear tactical plan, but maybe the players are not as strong as he would like, you can still go very far because expectations are clear, the plan is there, and add in a bit of luck, that can still take you all the way. If we look at Greece, for example, in the past, it's a good example of that. Or in general, in cup competitions, it can always work out in that way. So yeah, at the moment it doesn't look good for both of those, but if we drill down, then we'll get into a bit more details on both of those pieces. So if we start with our leader, Gareth Southgate, the head honcho, from a coaching perspective, then yeah, it's I like to use an analogy where you look at the different workplaces in the world since time has begun, any type of company, organization, what have you. And you'll always have a lot of people in there that are promoted to positions that you think, how did you manage that? You don't really have the skills or knowledge or experience to be in such a role. But very often it's because you have friends in high places, or it's just the right place, right time. And I think that's how it's the best way to summarize it with Southgate as well in this position. So looking back at his track records, then you'll say, okay, it was a little bit tricky. He finished up as a player, a very loyal servant to Middlesbrough back in 2006, before then immediately jumping into the hot seat and taking up the reins. That's always difficult to do. We've seen it with also Vincent Kompany and Anderlecht a few years ago as well. And that transition of being on the pitch to now being off the pitch is always a difficult one. And I think he was there for around 3 years or so, 3.5 years maybe. In that period of time, I think it was just under mid-table, maybe second half of the table finishes in the Premier League, maybe 12th, 13th, something like that, consecutively back-to-back. Nothing overly or inspiring, underwhelming in general, but he was in the third year also on course to deliver something like that. I think they actually started off in a very good way in the top half of the table for a couple of months or a few months, where he also won Manager of the Month for the Premier League. So it looked like everything was going in a good direction. However, it seemed to spiral out of control with a huge amount of winless games, which then took them down. And it was a little bit unfortunate, I would say, for him that he was fired as they were then looking to make that push back to promotion. I think they were just a point off the top or something like this. So a strange moment in the middle of the season to send him on his ways. So a little bit unfortunate from that perspective. And but overall, if you look at it, you say his win percentage for that period of time was less than 30%, which is not exactly wonderful, something that you look at as a real winning mentality and culture that he brings to a club. So, but it was his first experience, and from that, took a little bit of a break before then moving towards the under 21s again. Some nice moments, especially with the talent that you had at that time, and overall, seemed like he was maybe in a good role for him at that point in time. They went to the European Championships. However, I don't think they really performed very well. Potentially, I don't think they even won any games in the group stages. Nonetheless, the England job came round at that moment in time. Now, as we said before, it's around knowing the right people and also being in the right place in the right time. And at that point in time, it was really Sam Allardyce's job. He had just come into the role, maybe 2 months previously. I think he was in charge for maybe one game only, before he had some sort of legal / PR issues around the conversations that he was having behind the scenes in terms of advising people how to get round, or just during a conversation, how to get around certain FIFA regulation around third-party ownership. Not saying anything illegal, but overall I think it was more about just not having a good look that your manager for the national team is engaging in such discussions and certain other comments around that. So that forced him out, and therefore Southgate was there as a bit of the caretaker role, and of course knowing the system, knowing how it works at the FA behind the scenes, and in particular with, I guess, the FA not wanting to go down a foreign route again, or at least not in the immediate future. Southgate also knowing the types of players that will be the next senior players as well, that seem to all line up for him, and therefore he's in the job. Well, unfortunately for us, I think the different types of limitations that he has are clear. I think one thing that he did bring at an early period of time was some sort of togetherness and team ethos within that squad or within the dressing room. I think he tried to bring that togetherness in certain tournaments in the past, but in the end, you are a cup competition manager, and you'll need to be very decisive in the way that in your actions, whether that's in terms of your vision, your tactical plan, the way that you respond, the way you're going to be proactive about things, the changes that you make, the selections that you make. They need to be bold. Fortune favors the brave and all that sort of stuff. So that's clearly very far from the type of personality that he is, which is, I think, he's probably a good manager. He probably does, like we said, bring certain confidence and instill that belief in types of players, and really believe around team building and that sort of thing. But overall, pretty vanilla in terms of actually value add. The point is, if you have somebody else, would you really miss Gareth Southgate? And I think the point is yes, but not in a flattering way. And that, unfortunately, I think sums him up without having to go into too much detail. I don't think there's too much to dissect with him, unfortunately. So let's talk about the more fun part, which is really about the player squad. I want to start with the term overrated, which is not something to be taken out of context, which it often is, where you say, this person is overrated, so that means they're totally terrible. No, not at all. What I mean by overrated is overrated. You have a certain talent, maybe you're absolutely excellent, but it's not to the level that it's being portrayed, or how you consider yourself maybe. So I think this is something that's been very common with England players over the past and current situation as well. And what you do is, when you start labeling them world class, for example, of course that depends on different definitions, but world class for me is really, do you slot into a world's best squad of, 16 players or something like that? So very, very limited. Outside of that, you're an excellent player, but world class is really pretty much undroppable. And so what we've done in the past is call players, a lot of players, world class. Now, if we take the golden generation in the past, then I would say there were players like Ashley Cole was world class in that left back position. Paul Scholes was a world class central midfielder. But then when you're adding someone like Frank Lampard, who I thought was a very excellent player, but not a world class player, then it starts to add difficulty, because now Lampard starts to become considered undroppable. And it's almost like Scholes, who was actually for me the better talent, suffers because he's been now moved out to the left-hand side, and it's like, well, you'll be able to accommodate it. So that's always something that it's a bit painful, and we're doing it now, I think, where we start throwing out this world-class Foden, Bellingham, etc. They will get there maybe one day, but they're absolutely not what I call world-class today. Now, then the question is always, okay, but how do they do such a good job at club level? They're playing in teams that are at the highest level of club competition. Well, if you take the past and you take currently as well, they are a very intricate and intrinsic part of a machine to fulfill a certain role, and it's almost like they're allowed to be successful. They're allowed to succeed through the planning of the team, through the setup of the team, and actually a lot of the real game IQ, intelligence role is really played by others that allows them to succeed. So if you take the past with Lampard and Gerrard, then you say like, well, your partner was Xabi Alonso that did a lot of the intelligent work behind you to allow you to have that box-to-box role. Lampard, you had Makelele and Essien, for example. Today you'll have a Rodri in the midfield of Man City. You'll have Toni Kroos at Real Madrid. These are certain very specific profiles that really have they have a grip of the game, and they're able to change things up when things are not going well. And that's why when you then collect these very good players and push them together without a really cohesive plan behind it, that it doesn't work out. It's I don't think anything more sophisticated than that. It's just appreciating what they're playing or what they're surrounded with at the club scene. Egos as well, really important. I think players do end up buying into their own hype when they're told all the time that they're world class. I think we see it now, to be very honest, with Jude Bellingham, who is an excellent player, but it's really his first season at Real Madrid, and we know, in 2 years' time, you might be nothing. If you look at Gareth Bale or someone like this, a lot of players have, started off with really, good intentions and good starts in general, and then fade away, look to have transfers away to other clubs. So, let's let it play out. Let the guy have the career he's going to have. But at the moment, I think there is that sort of believing your own hype. So, there's a real marketing machine behind Jude Bellingham at the moment in terms of, he looks the part. He has that glamorous role at Real Madrid as well. Is he going to be, which is, yes, the next big superstar that, brands can get behind? He's modeling in his underwear. And now he's trying to walk around, or fly about the pitch like Superman as well in different positions, which isn't great, as I mentioned in another video as well. So, this whole building up of players is always something really difficult that needs to be managed in a lot better way. The second part around the player group, and especially this one here, is really around leadership, I would say. So I think it's clear to see that there is this absence of that type of profile throughout the team. You'll have a couple of personalities, maybe a Declan Rice and Harry Kane, obviously, up front. But when you hear a Harry Kane, for example, saying in a press conference that they don't really know what the plan is around pressing, that's a big problem. And you would then look towards these type of players to get them, get the team together. If we're not getting what we need from Gareth Southgate, let's at least try and work some things out between ourselves. If we're talking about pressing, to be honest, it's just a bit of running around, to put it in a simplistic term, and it's really about how you do that in the best way in terms of who goes when. So maybe we can put our heads together and think about how we're gonna go about this in the next game. Might not work out, of course. You need time. You need time on the pitch to put things into practice. But at least you go out there with some sort of intention rather than just winging it and seeing how it plays out. So that's a bit of a weak point, I think, in terms of having those strong personalities within that squad. And I think overall, when we're talking about England as well, and this will be, again, going back quite some years, and the pressure of playing for England, I think really affects them. I don't think they find it very enjoyable as an experience. It's something that, it's a burden. And to a large extent, it's also self-inflicted because, you will see a lot of England players with their, very flash lifestyles, and that's, in the public eye. And then when this is, when they're put in front of the players and, it's perceived that the work rate is not where it should be, it's very hard to then get fans on your side when they see that and compare it with what they've seen previously. You'll see a lot of other countries which have maybe more limited players, but they're giving their all. They're not, in particular, very flashy as well, and they're very well, received by the fans. That in the end they did what they could do, and that's what we can ask. So it's always that feeling. There's always more to get from these players, and that's what then leaves the sour taste. So there's probably some others, but if I carry on, I'll get a little bit more depressed about it as well. The next game is coming up. The draw has opened up quite favorably for England, so let's see how that plays out. And overall, I do expect some sort of response, and potentially that they should get the result that they need. But against a well-drilled unit that's going to defend in a hard way, potentially penalties could always turn up and England crash out. You could always get a shock. But let's see how it plays out. And hopefully there'll be more to talk about England in the tournament coming up. Please click subscribe to keep up to date.